our Sunday showdowns as we give you our opinions on starts, sits, sleepers, everything in every single Sunday matchup. We will go to the Battle of the Bays, Aaron Rodgers and his Green Bay, and Tom Brady and his Tampa Bay. Rank, start us off here.
Stop it. Oh, I missed this NFC Central contest from years ago, but of course, Mike Evans is somebody you're obviously going to start. But I just have to point out that the Packers have been playing really good against the pass this season. They've allowed 150 yards per game. That's the 7th fewest in the NFL. They've not allowed a top 15 wide receiver since week 1. Chris Godwin expected to be back in this contest too. And we've only seen Mike Evans catching those short touchdowns. He seems awfully touchdown dependent. So just beware, but you're still starting him. But another player who I like in this contest is Robert Tonyan, the tight end. Now, obviously the last time we saw him, he had 3 touchdowns in prime time. And it might seem like you're chasing the points, but he's had 5 touchdowns since week 2. That is tied for the most in the NFL with Mike Evans, who I was just talking about. So this is me bringing the synergy together. I'm interested to see how this works out with Devontae Adams back, but I still, because of the lack of depth at the tight end position, still feel like he's a top 10 tight end this week.
Big Bob Tonyan, big game from him for Rank. Let's go over to the Texans and the Titans. Marcus, you're not sold on a guy who had a great week last week.
Yeah, I'm saying to beware of Ryan Tannehill, and he had a huge game on Tuesday against the Buffalo Bills. Look, he has taken advantage of some good matchups, though I'll give him certainly credit for that, but you just gotta watch him. He's mostly just being efficient. He's not turning the ball over. He's not necessarily going out and doing anything spectacular. This Houston defense is fairly middle of the pack in quarterback fantasy points allowed, but the run defense is bad. So I have a feeling this could be a game where the Titans just hand the ball to Derrick Henry repeatedly and sort of don't ask Ryan Tannehill to do a whole lot in this game. So I think his totals might just be sort of mediocre at best.
On the other side, I am taking a page out of Rank's post-coach firing book and saying start Brandon Cooks as we're dividing this season into 2 parts, before Bob and after Bob. Tim Kelly calling plays for his long-term viability, and it's going to be against the Jags where there was a lot of action for Brandon Cooks. He had 12 targets against the Jags. Let's say he gets half of that opportunity that he did last week. That's still 6 targets. I'm not risking post-Bob Cooks on the bench in deeper leagues. Let's go over to the Falcons and the Vikings. No Dalvin Cook, so everybody's already on board the Alexander Mattison train. Who else should we start, right?
And I'm sure everybody's going to be starting Adam Thielen as well, but I really like Justin Jefferson as a rebound game this week. He's had at least 14 fantasy points in 2 out of his last 3 games. Of course, the Seahawks game was not great, but the Falcons have allowed the 2nd most receiving yards per game to wide receivers. They're allowing 3 receiving touchdowns per game this season. That is the most in the NFL. So we saw last week how DJ Moore was able to kind of get back into our fantasy lives. I really do believe that Justin Jefferson will do the same thing here.
And we had lots of scoring in this game, or we expected, and we assume lots of touchdowns as well. And I know his health and production have fluctuated over the years, but Todd Gurley is still scoring touchdowns at an alarming rate. In fact, ever since he had a disappointing week 1, his fantasy scoring output has gone up every single week. And here's a Vikings defense that gives up around 25 points a game against running backs. Let's keep riding Gurley. And speaking of, get some more Sunday showdowns. Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Florio, you're starting a recent waiver pickup.
Yeah, I'm saying if you were lucky enough to get Chase Claypool off of waiver wires, you should go ahead and start him. He showed his ceiling last week. It was more fantasy points than any wide receiver scored this season. But what I like is that he led the team in targets, catches, yards, and touchdowns. He had 11 targets last week. Juju hasn't seen that number in a single game this season. Deontay Johnson has been ruled out, and the Browns are allowing the 2nd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. I think this is another week where Claypool can have a big game.
Steelers defense is tough, so I think it's going to be very tough for Baker Mayfield. And when things get tough for Baker, he looks for Jarvis Landry. I sense a lot of Kareem Hunt and Jarvis Landry in this one, especially if Odell is out of the game. As good as the Steelers are, we saw the Texans move the ball against them. I think 9 targets. Yes, that was it. 9 targets for Jarvis Landry against a good Colts defense. I could see that again this week. Let's go over to the Bengals and the Colts. All clear after some false positives in Indy, right?
Yeah, I know a lot of people have been waiting for the Jonathan Taylor breakout game, and I do believe that this is going to be the one. After a tough loss last week against the Browns, I think that the Colts are going to go back to running the football, and I think they're going to give an extended opportunity to Taylor in this one to go ahead and take advantage of this matchup. So if you've been waiting, this is the JT breakout game.
Frank, I have been waiting, so I hope you're right. But speaking with another rookie this week, I'm going to say sit Joe Burrow against the Colts. Last week I said it was a big test for him going against the Ravens. He scored less than 5 fantasy points. I think he failed that test. It's another tough matchup this week. The Colts are allowing the fewest points per game to quarterbacks, and they are the only team holding quarterbacks to less than 200 yards per game. I think you get away from Joe Burrow this week.
All right, Ravens and Eagles, a battle of the birds. Florio, who we got?
I'm saying start Marquise Brown. He has 15 targets of 20-plus air yards this year. That is the second most in the NFL. His targets have increased in 2 straight games. Like you see there, 12-plus fantasy points in 2 straight. And the Eagles are allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. I know the Ravens offense hasn't been what we thought, but this is an opportunity for their passing game to get right.
No, I'm with you, Michael. I love Hollywood Brown this week, but unfortunately, I'm going to be sitting Carson Wentz, who leads the NFL with 9 interceptions this season. The Ravens have allowed the 10th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks this season, but those numbers are skewed because there is a game in there with Patrick Mahomes. In non-Patrick Mahomes games, they're allowing, on average, less than 12 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. I'm going to have to sit Carson Wentz this week.
Get back into some Sunday showdowns, and we'll go over to the Broncos and the Patriots. Marcus, what are we doing?
We're starting Cam Newton is what we're doing. I mean, he's been activated off the COVID list and looks like he should be ready to go for this week's game. Facing a Broncos defense that's given up the 7th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Part of the reason, they're just not getting pressure, and this is probably where they miss Von Miller quite a bit. Second lowest QB pressure rate in the league. We saw against the Seahawks, the Seahawks couldn't get any pressure on Cam, and he lit them up, so I think he's a definite start this week.
All right, got the Rams and the Niners on Sunday night. Maurice Jones-Drew, which Ram is a must start?
Well, that's going to be Jared Goff, and I'll tell you why. One, he's from the Bay Area, so he always plays well back at home, but the Niners' defense is just banged up. Okay, you have both corners are out, no pass rush right now, and I think Sean McVay and this offense is playing lights out. Jared Goff is a must start. If you don't have him and he's on the waiver wire, pick him up. He's a great stream this week. It just seems like this defense is giving up a ton, and the Rams are rolling.
All right, and again, happy Global Cat Day on Earth to all the cats out there, and to the Lions and Jags also. Rank, give us somebody whose roar is more of a meow this weekend.
Well, I'm paying attention to what MJD is talking about because I have a team that has both Jared Goff and Gardner Minshew, and I'm worried about starting Gardner this week, especially with the injury concerns to DJ Chark. Now, remember the one bad game that Gardner had? It came when Chark was not on the field. So if he's unable to go on Sunday, I'm going to make that switch and make sure I start Jared Goff. Although MJD's kind of convinced me of that anyways. But still, just for everybody else, just be concerned about Gardner.
All right, let's finish strong on our Sunday showdowns. The Jets and the Dolphins. Marcus.
I'm starting Myles Gaskin this week. I mean, he's been playing well all year long. He's got a 65% snap share, about 17 touches per game, 4 more targets in every game. So he's pretty much a part of everything they do offensively. And he's got a great matchup against the Jets, who've given up the 5th most fantasy points per game for running backs, tied for 2nd most rushing TDs allowed to running backs as well. So this is a great opportunity for Gaskin.
Marcus, I'm saying you could start his quarterback as well. Start Ryan Fitzpatrick against the Jets. Fitzy right now is the QB7 on the year in total points. He has scored 21 or more points in 4 straight games, including multiple passing touchdowns in 3 of those 4. The Jets have been burned by the better quarterbacks that they've faced this year, and Josh Allen and Kyler Murray. I think Fitz is their biggest test since those two. And this is somewhat of a revenge game for him, so start Fitzy this week.
The man of many revenge games, the football team and New York's other team. Who gets the start here, Marcus?
I'm going with Antonio Gibson. And I know we want instant gratification, so after about 2 or 3 weeks, we were sort of wondering, well, maybe this Gibson guy is not going to be what we thought. But he's starting to see more targets, 5 targets in back-to-back games. That actually could get better with Kyle Allen or even Alex Smith at quarterback. Plus, the Giants a bottom 12 defense against fantasy running backs this year.
Yeah, I love starting Antonio Gibson this week, and I'm also going to start Terry McLaurin. I know that people have some reservations because Kyle Allen is his quarterback, but we talked about it last week that DJ Moore really thrived with Kyle Allen. And another reason people might be scared is James Bradbury has been shutting down some opposing wide receivers. But with the volume of targets that Terry McLaurin is getting, I feel very confident starting him this week.